Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the inner workings of the creative process. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. My guest today is author Tosca Lee. Tosca originally wanted to be a ballerina, but ended up switching to writing with some help from her dad while she was in college. Since then, she's become a best-selling author of a wide variety of books, including The Line Between and its sequel, A Single Light. Tosca talked with me about her early writing experiences, how the Kindle has changed things for authors, and the eerie feeling of writing a fictional pandemic shortly before an actual one hits. And the one she made up is even scarier than COVID. I think you'll really enjoy my conversation with Tosca Lee. Welcome to the podcast, Tosca.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm really, curious to hear your story, especially having read The Line Between about a month ago.
Oh gosh.
But
sorry.
Don't apologize.
I'm apologizing because it's a pandemic story. So for anyone listening, it's this. Yeah.
It did add an extra dimension to the whole experience, I have to say, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, I'm curious to know, how did you get started writing? Was it something you did as a kid, or did you find it later, or?
I was first published in third grade, which I didn't have any idea that was a weird thing. And it wasn't a big deal. It was a pet newsletter. And this is back in the day when newsletters were actually printed and they arrived in a real mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my teachers said, why don't you write a little article about your dog passing away? Because my English bulldog had just died. And so I wrote this page and a half about my dog, and it was very dramatic. And so I was, published. And, I loved to write, and I wrote a lot. I used to win, in fourth and fifth grade, I won a young authors competition, and I totally kind of forgot about that until just recently. I had a friend who illustrated my stuff, and she mentioned it the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that. But, my whole driving thing back then was not writing. It was ballet. And I wanted to be a ballerina. I was very serious about it. I danced with some companies as a young person. And that was my whole life's ambition, really. So writing was really not in the forefront of my mind by any means. That said, I loved reading, and I did well with writing, but ballet was the thing. So sometime around when I was 14, I tore a muscle.
Ooh.
And that can really set you back. And, ballet is a very competitive, physical, thing. And that was kind of disastrous for me. So, the plan after that was, okay, well, you're going to go to college and figure out some other career probably. And so I did. I went off to school. I lived in Nebraska. I live in Nebraska again. I went off to Massachusetts for college, and I came back for spring break my first year. And I was talking with my dad about one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Mists of Avalon by a lady named Marion Zimmer Bradley. Big, big, thick book. And it's,
yes.
and I loved that. I loved it for that too. But I loved the characterization of, the story is about the women behind King Arthur's throne. And I was talking about this book with my dad, and I was talking about how a great novel is a lot like a roller coaster. It's got these, twists and turns. They may not, it may not be like thriller type twists and turns, but they're emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to the end, and the first thing you want to do is go back and start over, because if it's a really good book, you don't want to leave that story world, right? And this is back in, we didn't have a lot in the way of video games and, all this stuff now. I mean, books were the main escape. And I just blurted it out that day, and I said, I think I'd really like to try to write a novel. My dad said, okay, Tosca, I'll make you a deal. I was supposed to work as a bank teller that summer, and I was a terrible bank teller. I'm just not good with numbers, and really just wasn't very good at. And so he said, all right, I will make you a deal. I will pay you what you would have made working at the bank this summer. If you spend the summer writing your first novel, do it full time and treat it like a job. And
Wow.
yeah, and that was a no-brainer for me. It was like, yeah, oh, okay. So, and that's what I did. And that's how I got started. I wrote my first novel that summer. It's never been published. It was this, I, of course, I had to do this like big, heavy, epic story about the Neolithic people of Stonehenge. You know, nobody told me, that might be a bit much for your first one or to write in the
Just a
summer.
little.
Yeah, so I did it because nobody told me I couldn't. So I did try to get it published. Or I tried to get an agent actually, and I stumbled across the rejection letter from Writer's House because of course I had to go big. So I sent it to Writer's House, and I found that letter not too long ago, and it goes like this: even after reading the 23-page synopsis, never write a 23-page synopsis. I mean, when I saw that, my heart just I died a little bit because that's a big faux pas. But anyway, even after reading the 23-page synopsis, I'm still not sure what this novel is about. Your characters are two-dimensional, your plot lacks tension, but it is strangely reminiscent of Clan of the Cave Bear, which was my other favorite novel. So all I took away from that is your book is like Clan of the Cave Bear, and maybe you should, keep doing this. And so that's how I got started. And that was 1989 that I wrote that first one. So it has really been kind of a journey of decades for me.
I think it's amazing that that's what you took from that letter. And it
Uh,
feels to be kind of like, it's the innocence of not knowing any better, right?
right.
But
Mhm.
but I mean, it could have so easily stopped you right in your tracks and made you say, because I thought you were going to say,
Mm,
what I took from this was never write anything ever again,
no,
which
yeah.
obviously, you have. But that's amazing. But I also like what you said earlier, which was that you did it because no one told you you couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know any better, and in some ways, ignorance really is bliss,
Hmm.
you know? So, yeah. But I think in some ways, and I never really have thought about this until just this moment when you said that, but I think in some ways the world of ballet kind of helped prepare me um, for that because ballet it's a very black and white world, and writing is not that way, but you get rejected a lot.
Mm,
You audition for things, you get rejected, nothing is ever quite good enough. There's, perfection is never achieved in ballet. So I don't think that the letter was of course it was disappointing, but I don't think it was as daunting as it might have been had I not had all those years of being told that, basically it's not good enough. So, yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. You were sort of, immune to it because
Yeah.
of all
Or,
that.
yeah, or used to it or something.
Yeah, that it just didn't hit you that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
W-
I was bummed though, because, it's of course I was hoping
Oh,
that,
sure.
you know, they'd say this is fabulous and whatever. But, you know,
What did your dad think?
he's always supported kind of my artistic endeavors. And so he was just like, keep going, try to send it off somewhere else or fix it up or, you know,
That's
and he's not
great.
a big like fiction reader or anything like that, but he is a big believer. My dad came over in the very early 60s with some money tucked in his sock. My dad's from South Korea,
Hmm.
and he came here to go to school, and he ended up staying and marrying an American lady. And so I think the idea of, kind of big audacious dreams that's never been a foreign idea to him.
That's
So,
great.
yeah,
You
yeah.
certainly, made it worth his money when you turned out something that size.
Well, I found it the other day, and I made so many mistakes. This is back in the day when you print it and you send it,
Hmm.
and you're supposed to keep it loose, put it in a box, like a Kinko's box of loose paper. You're not supposed to, I bound it. I put a cover on it with a picture of Stone, and it's just so cringeworthy today to me. But you know, oh well.
But if it hadn't been for that, you wouldn't be where you are. So, we all have those little memories like
It
that.
was definitely a learning experience for sure.
Yeah. So did you just sit down 8 hours a day like you were at work that summer?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was really hard to do. It's hard still to sit down and try to write 8 hours a day. Um, because you've got so much stuff vying for your attention. It's hard to just sit in your room. And, it's funny because the pandemic has caught us in the middle of a remodel. And so my desk right now is in our bedroom. So I'm working in the bedroom. But, that's how I wrote my first novel, was at the desk in my bedroom at my dad's house. So, I guess there you are.
Whatever works.
Yeah, I mean, you do what you got to do. So,
So how did writing that first novel change? Did it change the rest of your college years, or did it just kind of propel you as a side project, or how did that work?
I kind of decided I really wanted to try this writing thing after that. So I took a lot of English type, courses. There wasn't a lot in the way of creative writing. So in a lot of ways, the one thing I found really daunting, and I know I'm not alone in this, a lot of authors have shared this with me. I felt like I was never formally trained, to do creative writing. I took a short story class. That's all that we had at that time at Smith College where I went, was short stories. So I took that. I learned a little bit from that, and just have kind of had to glean some things here and there along the way. But it was always in the back of my mind. I always thought maybe I'll try to fix that novel up. I never did. I did take a job right after college where I wrote for a computer magazine, which was not, it was not like the dream, but I learned a lot. I was writing professionally, and I learned a lot about the editorial process. I wrote a computer book through that experience and process, or because of it. So, the path is never straight, right?
Right.
it's always kind of tangential and sideways. So, yeah. So I knew that I would keep doing it, and it just took several years before I had one that I could finally, push through and see all the way through. And the one that became my first novel, I wrote around 98, the first draft, 98, 99. But it didn't get picked up until about 2006, I want to say. And I think it came out in 2007. So, I mean, this is a long time. It was, several years for me, this process.
Well, and I think it's important that people know that, that it's not like you just sit down with your laptop at your kitchen table and pound away on the keys for 3 months. And then a year later, your book comes out. It's almost never like that.
It's almost, I do know a couple people like that. And I do know a couple people who have had their first novels accepted, and who are very successful and beautiful writers. It was not that way for me.
Yeah.
So,
do you think that the fact that it took that long, I mean, there has to have been a fair bit that you learned just through that?
I would say so. I mean, I learned a lot of things along the way that have really helped me out in this career, because in between, I did a stint as Mrs. Nebraska. And so I did this pageant thing, and then I became a consultant. And so I flew all over the world in a consultant capacity, working for the Gallup organization. And I learned a lot about just my own strengths. I learned a lot about talking to people. I learned a lot about doing interviews and, getting in front of people. And it all has contributed to this career. Just, once again, a very crooked road.
Those are two very different things too. How did you end up doing a pageant, and what did you do with Gallup?
Yeah, so the pageant thing was, somebody just said, you should go try this. And I was like, okay. I'd never done it before. I didn't grow up doing this. And I just thought, and it's kind of a testament to the power of somebody having enough belief in your ability to do something that, by somebody saying that to you, suddenly something that you never would have thought of becomes a possibility. And I love that, and I hope that I'm able to, speak that kind of possibility into the lives of other people. Maybe not about a pageant, but about writing or about reaching for goals, things
Mhm.
like that. So, because there's so much power in somebody saying, I think you should try this, or I think you could do this. So I went and did it. It was a totally, I, I didn't know what I was doing once again. Um, but it was a really strange means to a really good end, because it gave me the opportunity to get out into the community and represent some wonderful charities and to do some, really meaningful work, you know. So raise money for great organizations, and shine a light on some wonderful, ethnic festivals around the state and things like that. So Gallup was another thing where somebody was like, "Why don't you go try to do that?" And I was like, "Meh, you know, I let me see what's possible." And so I went through the interview process, just wondering if I could get a job there if I needed one. I'd been um, I'd been freelancing for a while and doing some other things, and they said, "Why don't you come on board?" And I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." I hadn't, really meant to go into this world of, management consulting and stuff, but I loved it, for as long as I did it. But there came a point when the writing happened and the first book happened, the second, and then I was looking at doing a trilogy with another author where a choice had to be made because I couldn't keep up the writing
Mhm.
schedule and do my job at the same time. So,
It doesn't sound like it was a
yeah.
tough choice.
It wasn't, but the whole, the whole health insurance thing, it's scary giving
Ooh,
up your health insurance, it
yeah.
was like and a regular paycheck, so those 2 things were kinda like, "Oh," that was the only kind of,
Yeah,
it wasn't a choice, I knew what I was gonna do, but it was scary, so,
it's daunting, to say the least, even to think
yeah,
about that.
it was daunting, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
yeah,
So what's it
kind of a
like?
leap of faith.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
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 to speak, yeah.
so what's it like co-writing with someone?
Mm. Um, I'm actually co-writing a novel right now. So, um, I think it's different each time, it's different each partnership. And I know a lot of people who do co-write, and I think I can, I think I can say in all honesty that they all have a different process.
Mhm.
So, I think it's a lot of compromise. It's a lot of, conversations. And, honestly, it is faster, I think, to at first, especially, it's faster to write a book on your own.
Mhm.
So, by the time that we got to the third book of the trilogy, we were comfortable enough with one another's strengths and, knew one another as writers well enough to be able to write very quickly at that point. But I'd say at the beginning, though, it's definitely kind of slow going. And the advice that I give people whenever they're interested in co-writing is to always know what your strengths are, as a worker, but also as an author. Know what you're bringing to the table and how that complements the other person. So,
How do you split up the work? Is it like, do you alternate chapters, or do you, I mean, that seems way too
mm,
easy, I guess, but
some people do that, and you can do it that way. And I can say that in our trilogy, we did each book a little differently. So in the first one, we talked through everything, talked through all the plot points, and then I took the first stab at the first draft, and then he'd come in and rewrite it, and then I'd go in and rewrite it, and we just kept rewriting one another because we were trying to find a common voice and get
Mhm.
that blend. And it became a lot more effortless later on. But the second book, I'd say we probably shared equal amounts in the first draft. But and then the third book, I was doing a lot of the rewriting. So I think it just, that the secret, I think, is just really what works for you and what's comfortable. Um, the partnership I'm in now, he had a first draft, and I've gone in and pulled out all the wires and have started. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm going to redo this and that and this, and luckily, there's such a trust there that it's
Mhm.
like whatever you got to do. So, I've I've been very, very blessed in that partnership. So,
Do you
yeah.
find that you're basically killing each other's darlings all the time? Is it, oh yeah, I always do this and they're going to come along and they're going to take this part out and vice versa? Or is it more subtle than that?
I have killed other authors' darlings along the way, and I've had a few of my own killed as well. But I think when you get to a certain point in your career, you become comfortable holding on to some of those things just loosely because you're still emotionally vested in the story, but you're not necessarily so attached to certain things that you wrote anymore. You understand that so much of it can be expendable. So yeah.
Yeah.
That is to say, I mean, every now and then I do write something though, and I'm like, oh, I really like this part, or this part really sums up what's going on in the story or with this character right now perfectly. And there are certain things that I really do fight for, but
Mm-hmm.
but other things you just hold on to loosely. So
That
yeah.
seems like a great philosophy for many, many things that I think a lot of us could stand to learn, honestly. If we didn't learn that lesson in the last year, I don't know if we ever will, but yeah, everything can change so quickly. Yeah.
All the stuff we took for granted.
Oh, definitely. And probably will again.
Yeah.
I suspect as soon as we get out from under this, we'll start to all over again, even though we feel like we should know better.
Yeah.
I think that's
so.
just
Whatever the
human
normal
nature.
is what we assume it always is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to start talking about The Line Between, because I read it about a month ago, and you've already apologized for it.
So
right.
Yeah, so I apologize for the story just because with it being a pandemic story, I kind of feel like it's the joke that's like too soon or something. I wrote it before the pandemic, just so everybody knows. I wrote it in 2018. It came out
amazing.
in 2019. Well, thank you. And I love the story, and I love the main character. So, and it is the story of a young woman who has just been kicked out of a doomsday cult that she grew up in for most of her life. And she's having to start over in a world that a secular world that she's been taught to regard as evil. And then as this pandemic is marching across the nation, it seems a lot like the apocalypse that she's always been taught to expect was coming. And so I really enjoy a good disaster story. I love a good, and I enjoyed the study of the cults, and and it's interesting how many readers I've learned are really fascinated by cults as well. So I loved all of that. But when the pandemic came out, it was kind of a weird, surreal kind of thing. So it is a very different disease in my book, I should point out.
Yes. And I think that's when I finished it, I commented on Twitter that I never thought that anything could make COVID seem mild, but your book did.
Yeah, so it's a prion disease that has recombined and to become quite infectious. It recombines, the agent that causes the prion disease has recombined with the flu. And it causes rapid early onset dementia, and it's always fatal. So it's a very scary disease. It was very scary to consider, but fun to write about.
Yeah, that was the part that I was like, okay, COVID looks good compared to this. Never thought I'd say that, but it really does.
Yeah, I was like, well, yeah, it was. But, a lot of the stuff is still the same in the story and in real life with COVID, the distancing, the washing your hands, the need for hand sanitizer, the masks. And what's so weird is when both books, the Line Between and its sequel, A Single Light, both came out in 2019. A Single Light came out just like 4 months before COVID, before the pandemic started. Yeah. And so as part of the kind of marketing plan, we sent out these bags of goodies to like influencers and bookstagrammers and people like that. And we put like little things of hand sanitizer and and we put surgical masks and quarantine stickers, like the orange quarantine stickers in these bags. And I've actually had some people say, I had a mask because I got this swag bag from you, and I used that mask. And that's why we actually had a few masks on hand, because we had some left over. So it was like, I don't
Wow.
know.
I have to say the part where the masks came in, when I first noticed that in the story, I read it in very short period of time. I read it in two chunks, like 2.5 hours one night and a couple hours the next morning. And it was when I got to the masks that I was like, okay, I think all the hair on the back of my head just stood up, because this is eerie. And, even though it's funny, because when I picked it up, I didn't really think about the pandemic angle aside from, oh, that's interesting. And it didn't occur to me how totally real, real and surreal all at the same time it was going to be to read it.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of pandemic books. This one just kind of happened the timing was just weird about it. Um, but the pandemic angle certainly isn't unique in any
Mhm.
way. But yeah, the timing was just the weird thing.
Yeah. Well, and when I saw it, because you have a list of references at the end saying
Mm.
basically any of this could happen, because a really cheery note to end on.
Well,
And I
and it is a lot like it is quite disastrous in the book because the electrical grid goes down and all this stuff. But there were some hacks against some of our infrastructure
Mhm.
that happened in the pandemic as well, against I think the Department of Homeland Services or something. And it was like, you know, that was weird. But at least the grid's not down, so
Right.
yeah.
But and I haven't read the second book yet because I needed to take a little space after the first one, but I do want to go and read it. But I think one of the articles that you had included in that list, I think I read when it first came out, because there is, and I'll find it and I'll add it to the show notes for this, but they have been finding things coming out of the permafrost as the polar ice caps warm up, and there's things that are millions of years old that have been safely frozen in there all this time. And here we are cluelessly releasing them into the environment. Because I remember
Yeah.
reading that article and thinking, oh, that sounds absolutely beyond terrifying, because who
Yeah.
knows what it would be. So yeah, I mean, it is definitely not outside the realm of possibility at all.
No, and actually, one of those articles about a reindeer carcass that had thawed in the Siberian permafrost and happened to be infected with anthrax that got a whole village sick was part of the inspiration for this novel, actually. And then I ended up reading all these other articles about things that have been in the permafrost and melted and have come out, and how they've been able to germinate seeds. And then there's all these microbes that some people are calling zombie microbes and zombie bacteria and all this stuff. They're not really zombie things. They're just they've been frozen and now they're
Right.
it's fascinating. It really is. It's kind of scary too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely both.
Yeah.
Definitely both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like, when I originally read that article, because it was in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, something like that.
It was.
And it it seems like it should have made a bigger splash than it did. you know, it should have been, hey, we could be doing anything that we are not prepared for to ourselves, and maybe we should pay attention to this. And I feel like
Mm.
hardly anyone did.
Yeah, yeah, and who knows what's happening with that stuff. There was also a really interesting article about a Russian scientist who discovered this, millions of years old bacteria from the permafrost, and he injected himself with it. I mean, and I did mention that in the story too, but that's based on a real article. And he claims he's never had a flu or anything since. So I don't know, but you know, I'd try a lot of things in my life, but injecting myself with millions of years old bacteria from the permafrost is not one of them.
Not high on my list.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, there's being devoted to science, and then there's just being crazy. And I have to think that crosses the line.
That's the mad scientist right there. I think.
Yeah, for sure. But as to the cult aspect, I taught for about 8 years at a local private school here that's a Methodist school. So there were religion classes. And the cult class was always the most popular class. But there is definitely something about cults that just draws people in the popular imagination. What did you find when I know you've done piles of research on all of this in order to write the book. I mean, what did you discover while you were looking into it?
A lot of cults have a lot of things in common. There's always some kind of charismatic leader. There's always some kind of, love bombing and stuff like that goes on that gets people to join. It's easy enough when you're on the outside to say, how could you join this? Or why would you become involved with this? Even like lately with all the news around the NXIVM, group and Keith Raniere and all that stuff. But, I think human nature is quite consistent. And it is that, people want to belong, they want a purpose, and they want a group that they feel they are a part of. And cults prey upon that. And also, nobody goes in trying to join a cult. They find a place and they find a group of people that they feel they have something in common with. And it's like the slow process of boiling the frog, basically. So, yeah. Interesting stuff. And the way they differ is, those details can differ, like the things that are restricted or the things that, what the rules are. But there are always some kind of rules. There's always, kind of this elevation of the main cult leader. And it's fascinating. I hate to admit it. It's really interesting stuff, I have to say.
It is. I mean, there's a reason why people are so fascinated by it. And yet, as you say, nobody sets out, nobody leaves their house one morning and says, today I'm going to join a cult.
I think I'll join a cult today. Nope, nobody does that.
Doesn't happen. So do you think that, are we all equally susceptible to the things that work to draw people in? Or are there certain people that are more likely to fall for the love bombing and all of that? Or
I don't know. I mean, I think that we all have those needs and we all have those desires. I think that when people are in kind of transition type phases in their life, where they're starting over or they're seeking or searching for something, and we all go through those phases, I think that's when people are a little bit more susceptible. So, and, like if you already have a strong, foundation of people around you and a pretty big peer group and a pretty well anchored, family, or peer group, I think maybe less so, but you never know. I mean, I've been really surprised to read about some of the people, most recently with NXIVM, who have been involved with that. So I don't know.
And it is a little bit of an unfair question, it occurs to me, because you're not a psychologist who might have studied this kind of thing. But
so I have to preface all of that with that.
But I'm sure it was fascinating to read up on it in order to put the whole thing together. And
very much.
So my guess, both from the fact that you have worked with other people and you've talked about plotting things, and just from the amount of research that you had to have done in order to put this book together, is that you probably do a lot of plotting in advance, but I could be wrong about that.
I should, because I'm not a pantser. So in the writing world, there's pantsers and plotters. Pantsers are people who write by the seat of their pants. And I do have friends who are like that. The most notable example would be my friend Stephen James, who has written quite a few novels, and he's written books on writing, and he teaches writing. And I do too. And one thing I think is really important when you teach writing is, you help people find their own process, and, we don't try to legislate process. But, part of the process for some people is discovering the story, which is the fun part for people like my friend Steven. for me, when I do that, I just kind of create this giant mess, which is how I wrote my very first novel. I had not a lot of plot, really. So when I went into the line between, I don't know what happened. That was my 10th novel that I was writing for publication. And I think a part of me was just thinking, I've done this so long, it's practically innate now, right? So, I didn't plot quite as much as I probably should have. And what I ended up with was kind of a mess, actually. And I ended up having to rewrite it more than normal. So the lesson I learned was I am not my friend Stephen James, and I need to continue to work in the way that I work best, which is I needed to have a better outline. So after rewriting that, it actually delayed the publication of the book by about 3 months because I had to redo this. And I had to launch immediately into the sequel. So I really, really made sure to plot that one appropriately. And it paid off really well. I mean, I really enjoyed writing the sequel after the frustration of pulling all the wires out on the first one and everything. I enjoyed the sequel. It flew by. It happened really fast. I still leave wiggle room for stuff to happen on the fly because it always does. But I learned my lesson.
It's a good lesson to learn. It's sort of a be true to yourself kind of thing.
It's exactly that.
And like you said, for me, if I already know where the story's going, it's no fun to write it.
Right,
I have to figure it out along the way. But at the same time, I look at something like The Line Between and think, you have all of these, because you're telling some of it in flashback and you're telling some of it in the present. And then you're kind of, there's the whole, where did this come from mystery in with all of it. And I can't even imagine. And yet, I think if you are a pantser, you probably could write something like that without an outline. You're just going to go back and make sure that it all fits together later, because it's not like it's one draft and done ever.
Ever. Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, to me, I kind of look at it, and it's again, it's not a fair comparison because I'm looking at the finished product and not what's going on behind the scenes. But to me, it's just like, wow, this is really great because it does all fit together. It all comes together in the moment where it needs to come together. and honestly, I read it in 2 settings because I, couldn't stop for 2 hours.
Well, I love to hear that. So thank you.
And I finally was like, okay, it's time to go do something else before the day is over, because I didn't want to go to sleep with all of that in my head.
Oh yeah. Well,
but so I woke up and finished it the next day. But still, it works.
Yeah.
So whatever you did when you reworked it, obviously it did what it needed to do.
It took a few drafts to rework it, and there was a lot of tap dancing and reconfiguring going on behind the scenes. So I'm glad it's flowing and working that well. So thank you.
You're welcome. It really was an experience to go through it, but yeah. So, So when you wrote the second one, you knew what you were doing ahead of time and it kind of flowed. Does that affect how you feel about the two of them together as a unit?
No, the only thing it affects is my memory of the process, really. And I will tell you that I was writing the second one, so the first one was delayed, and I'm immediately writing the second one because it's coming out on the heels of the first one, within the same year. And I just remember my confidence had taken quite a hit after the first one, because even though I was happy with the finished product, I wasn't feeling very confident. And that's not a good way to go into, writing. And so I remember at some point when I was writing the second book, I became aware that the first one was up on NetGalley, which is where, book bloggers and reviewers go to download copies of soon to be released books so they can review them. And I freaked out. I went into a full blown panic. And I just remember this was late at night. I'm working late, on the sequel. And I just remember thinking, if nobody likes the first one, why am I even writing the second one? Because what is this all for? And I had been, kind of going along, having a great time up until that moment. And I remember, and I had just started to kind of get my mojo back, and I remember thinking, don't look, don't look, don't look, don't look, because people will actually post their reviews on NetGalley.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, don't look, don't look. And of course I had to go look. And so I go look, and people are like saying they really enjoyed it and they really liked it. And I was like so relieved. I got out of my chair and got on my knees and put my head on the floor because I was just really, really grateful and relieved. So
wow.
Yeah.
That is a serious crisis of confidence moment
Yeah.
there that was right on the head of a pin.
Yeah, it could have, if it would have gone the other way, it would have been really tough. So
yeah. Have you dealt with moments like that? I mean, I'm probably not to that degree, but other moments like that in the past?
Yeah, I have. When I was writing the sequel to The Progeny, there was kind of a seismic shift at the branch of Simon and Schuster that publishes my books. And so it changed my publishing schedule. It changed the people I work with. So much changed. And, they changed budgets. They changed all this stuff. And this is normal. This happens in the publishing industry. But it kind of messed with me a little bit. And it did kind of affect me psychologically. And, there was a point when my husband, who gives me so much good advice and so much encouragement, just had to say, go have some fun, because we read to escape. We write to escape. We write to connect with other people. And, we do it because it's fun. So, and I was losing the fun. And so when he said that, it was like, oh, okay. And that's kind of what happened again, too, with A Single Light, the sequel to The Line Between. Fixing the first book after making such a mess was really grueling. And so with the second book, it was like, you have to rediscover the fun. So
what did you do to rediscover the fun?
With A Single Light, one of the things I did is I created this character who I knew would come into the story, but I didn't know much about this character. And, even though I was outlining, I was leaving some room for some mystery. He turned out to be, he's mute, so he doesn't speak, but he has a biting sense of humor. And writing this guy who doesn't speak, but is actually very funny, was a challenge, and it was fun. And he became one of my favorite characters I've ever written. So that really made it fun. And coming up with some of the scenarios in the book where it's like, ooh, should I or shouldn't I? That's fun. I hate to say it, especially if you're going to, kill people and stuff like that. But, that was fun. So, just kind of, kind of getting that sense of doodling back. It's like we don't put pressure on ourselves when we're doodling.
Right.
Or making fun, things, and just kind of trying to get that feeling, back. So, yeah. Actually, when I teach writing, I share that my number one rule of writing is to write like no one will ever read it, because it takes the pressure off. And that's really the only way that I know how to create well and have a good time doing it. So,
lowering expectations is incredibly powerful, and people resist it so much because they think that just means that they're going to turn out complete crap, and it's not true.
I think it's almost the opposite, actually, because when you are creating freely and audaciously, I think that's when your best stuff happens.
Yeah. When you get into the flow and things
flow is so important.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's the good part. Yeah.
It is, though. I don't think you could live there all the time.
Time passes different. Yeah.
It does. And it always, whenever I land there for a while, at the end of it, I'm like, I'm exhausted. I can't even move.
But it's so good. Yeah.
But it's great while you're in it.
Yeah. Right.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So what have you learned through the teaching that you do?
I've learned to just take my own advice. This is something my husband reminds me about too. The advice that I give when I'm teaching, I think, is really solid, but sometimes it's easy to get kind of caught up in your own psychoses, whatever they are. And so I've learned to try to stop and, make sure that I am also applying the same things that I'm teaching, which is to write like no one will ever read it. Get the clay on the wheel, which means stop picking at it, just get to the end, and you can pick at it later. Otherwise you'll never finish.
Right.
And, to not be so worried about, the 2% of people who don't like your stuff, because those are not the people you're writing for.
Right.
So, yeah.
Not everyone is your audience.
Right.
So if you had stumbled on terrible reviews on NetGalley that day, it could have been that they just weren't your audience.
That's exactly, and I remember the first time I read like a really vitriolic one star review of one of my books, and like my heart started pounding, and it's like you get into this panic thing, and at the end of the day, that's a very small percentage. Those are not your people, and when they're really mean, they're telling you more about themselves than they are about your work.
Yes.
And I think that goes for anything, really. When people are mean, they're tipping their hand about what's going on in their own lives.
Yes. Yeah. They're showing you what's missing.
I think so.
Yeah. Wow. So it also occurs to me that your book came out right around the same time that the Kindle came out. And I'm wondering if that had an impact. Did you have like a very typical old school traditional publishing experience with the first book, and then did things shift, or were you kind of like slipstreaming into that whole process? Or
the Kindle, so my very first novel came out in 2007, and the Kindle was like just starting to happen pretty soon after that. So it was not like something in the contract with my very first, I signed for 3 books. But ended up changing publishers before the third. And so I bought those rights back and changed. But when the Kindle came out, it was kind of how do we handle this? What percentage are we supposed to be negotiating for or asking for? Or, what are the implications? And of course, it makes sense that this happens. The publishing industry seems to follow the music industry, which was, becoming so digital. And you had Napster, and you had, whatever the precursors to Spotify and things like that were. So it was just kind of something you learn to go with the flow and, do the best you can. The Kindle and, digital publishing is a challenge in many ways, but it's also really exciting because it's offered so much freedom to so many authors to, control every aspect of their book's publication, which is something you don't have with a traditional publisher.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you seen a lot of because I hear a lot. I have one book, I self-published it. I'm not super active in that community, but I know that I've heard a lot over the years about how, the Kindle, and people will say Amazon in particular, I don't know to what extent it's one or the other, have been either really good for authors or really terrible for authors. And obviously they both can't be true at the same time. But I'm just wondering, if you've noticed that, I don't know, what have you noticed? Does it make that much of a difference?
The one thing I notice, I think there's pros and cons all the way, but the one thing I've noticed is that the pricing has kind of been driven down. And the expectation of free content makes it, I think, harder for authors who may not control the pricing on their books. When you have a traditional publisher, they're gonna price, the books at the traditional price. So my $12.99 Kindle book, for instance, can't compete with a $4.99 Kindle book on price. And so when readers are shopping, according to price, that can be very difficult to compete with. When my hardcovers come out, and if my book comes out in hardcover first, which it does lately, hardcovers are not cheap. A cheap hardcover can be $24 or $26, but they can be even more than that. And some people, don't want to pay that, for a book, or can't pay that for a book. And
Right.
so, they have to wait for the paperback or for the Kindle to go on $1.99 sale, which is something I ask for often, actually. So I think that's kind of one of the challenges, is also just, there's so much free content, and it's very hard, I think, sometimes, with the expectation of prices being lower or free,
Mm-hmm.
when you're doing this for a living. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We're so spoiled now. And it's like, okay, but who can live on 99-cent books?
Right. I
Unless they're
love
selling millions and millions of them.
right, right. And I love a book bargain as much as the next person, and I love to find those books that are on sale for $1.99 too. But at the same time, this is a year, or this is months or a year or years of an author's life that have
Mm-hmm.
gone into creating these stories. I've spent 5 years on a book before, and there's an incredible amount of work,
Yeah.
going into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I
as
feel
you
like,
know,
yeah,
yeah,
I feel like this is also a good place to say to people, if you want to support your favorite authors,
oh
don't just
yes,
buy their
please, yeah,
books, but
yeah,
go in and review them. It makes a
yes,
huge difference. Even
hmm,
if you're, lukewarm about this particular book, go in and leave a review, leave an honest review.
yeah,
Amazon cares more about the number of reviews than they care about what they say. And
yeah,
it affects how they promote things. And trust me, your favorite author will, want to metaphorically get down and kiss your feet for it, because it
yes,
can be
yeah,
so hard to
absolutely.
get people to leave a review.
Yeah, and reviews don't have to be long. They can just be a couple sentences.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be elaborate. You don't have to stress out over it. Yeah, yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for that, for saying that.
Oh,
Yeah,
always,
yeah,
always. It's
hmm,
amazing. It's always been amazing to me. So it's about 4.5 years since I self-published my book, and it's been astonishing to me how many people will say, "Oh, sure, I'll go leave a review," and they never do.
yeah, yeah. And that they're just so important. I mean, it's crazy how important those reviews are, and how much it affects how well your book is noticed or seen. And
Mm-hmm.
discoverability right now is such a huge deal to authors, because there are so many books, and
Yeah,
there's so much content available. So those reviews, yeah, if you love an author, if you want to support an author, of course try to buy the book, but also leave reviews. Or also, another great thing is, request the book at your library too, because
yeah,
libraries are great consumers of books.
mm-hmm.
So that's huge too.
Yeah. And if you got the book from the library and read it there,
Hmm.
go ahead and leave a review as a thank you.
Write a review.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I'm sure that the same is true for musicians and other
yeah,
similar sites. I'm sure that it is, because
absolutely.
as the prices go down, they're struggling to find people who are interested, and it does help them to do that.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not blaming people who don't, who say that they'll leave a review and don't. I mean, I think they just forget, it's not the top thing that you normally do, but
Yeah,
it still makes a massive difference.
it makes a huge difference. And, it is one more thing to do, on the to-do list. And I completely get that.
Mm-hmm.
I've told myself, okay, I'm going to start going in and recommending books on BookBub, and and I've just had a terrible time, trying to keep up with it, especially when I'm on deadline or writing. It's like, so I understand, but, if you do love a book, you know, write the review while it's hot and fresh in your mind.
Yes.
That's what yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just make it a part of your book reading, music listening process.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what
yeah.
are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on a World War II book,
Ooh.
with this co-author, and it's the story of three teenage boys, who enlist, and are stationed in the Philippines right before World War II breaks out, and they end up fighting in the Philippines and end up as prisoners of war. So it's based on actual events and, inspired by true accounts, but it is a novel.
So did you have a particular interest in World War II, or did you come across this story that inspired you, or? Both?
This is the one where my co-author had a draft already and invited
right.
me to come into the process. So I was not even aware of, it's about the Bataan Death March. And I was not aware of this chapter of World War II history. And I think it's a really compelling, very difficult at times, but very important story to tell. World War II is not so, I mean, I've written a lot of ancient history, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, but I have not done more recent history. So it's been a real learning experience for me along the way.
I bet.
Yeah.
And that can't possibly be an easy thing to write about.
No, but it is difficult. Parts of it are very grueling. But I think that's where it becomes really important to dig into the characters and dig into the moments of beauty when they come along and, things like that.
That's a great way to put that. Dig into the moments of beauty when they come along.
Yeah.
I want that on a bumper sticker. So I don't forget. That's
and moments
great.
of occasional humor even. I think of movies like Braveheart. Braveheart was a very difficult movie in many ways because a lot of difficult things happen in that movie. But, the thing that kind of helped you through the hard parts of that movie were the moments of levity and beauty. So, yeah.
Yeah, we always need comic relief somewhere along the line.
That's the truth. Especially now.
It's just like we have in this last year, right? Which I'm hoping sooner rather than later we'll feel like we're back to normal. But
yeah,
I don't think we'll know what normal is for a while.
I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah. And I think I noticed that I've kind of forgotten parts of normal. Like, what did I do on the weekends before? What was it like to drive to work in the morning?
Right. Yeah.
It's so alien now. And I wonder if normal will really look like we think it will. I think it'll be harder to adjust to some of those things again. And maybe we just won't.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Maybe we'll say, we liked this part. We're going to keep that.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as I complain about Zoom and all that stuff, it's been awfully nice to be able to do so many things without having to travel for them.
Yes.
That has been nice.
Did you travel a lot for book tours before?
I did. And I spent 2019 really hustling a lot. So in one sense, last year was kind of a nice, break. But then I have gone a little bit stir crazy, with wanting to get out. So
haven't we all?
Yeah, I'll be ready. I'll be ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me.
Oh, thank you so much.
That's it for this week. My thanks to Tosca Lee for joining me. I hope you'll go leave a review for a favorite author or musician, or for this podcast if you're enjoying it. It has more of an impact than you can imagine, and we truly appreciate every single one. Thanks so much. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.